Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with hosts Jimmy Hinton
and Jimmy's mom, Clara.
And as always, thank you to the patrons of our podcast for your continued support. And without you, we would not have a podcast.
Absolutely. Double, triple thanks. Thank you for making this all possible.
Absolutely. How to diagnose your church. We developed a checklist for this episode that you can go down through and just really quickly diagnose your church to see whether it's healthy when they respond to allegations of abuse, or if any kind of abuse happens within the organization. How well do they respond? How healthy is your church? And this is not just churches. This is all kinds of organizations. We say churches, but I think this applies pretty equally across all organizations. Incidentally, after we stop recording this podcast, I have a phone call with a parent of somebody who was the target of spiritual abuse, horrific spiritual abuse by a preacher who has a pattern of doing this from church to church to church. He's been fired from literally every church that he's ever preached at. He moves from state to state. I personally spoke with the elders at the church that he's at currently, and I said repeatedly, don't take my word for it. Do what I did and call the other churches and find out what this guy did. Whether they did that or not, I don't know, but I received a message from this parent, and she said the church that he's at is allowing him to quote-unquote resign, and he already has applied to another church, and this new church that he's applying to has no idea what this guy, what his past is, what he's capable of, and so the cycle will continue. And so our phone call is, how do we intervene and start informing churches of who this guy is? So this is the result of this. This is really close to home. I deal with this stuff every single day. So, this is not just kind of shooting from the hip. This is a routine problem.
Jimmy, I was going to say, I as long as I've been in the church, and actually part of, you couldn't call me part of church leadership, but very aware, being a preacher's wife, of how leadership works within the churches. And also, I'm glad you mentioned it's not just churches. Being on school board, I've mentioned time and time again.
Yeah, schools are horrific.
Oh, wow. I experienced this, what you're talking about, where a person is excused by allowing them to resign. And the public has no idea what went on behind the scenes, and that person just moves on to the next place. So right. I think this is very appropriate. It's something we need to address, and I'm glad you brought this topic, to our attention today.
Yeah. So how do you diagnose your church? This is just a super quick checklist. It's not meant to be exhaustive. It shouldn't take you 9 weeks to diagnose your church. You should be able to do this within minutes. So here's a super quick checklist. Number one, unhealthy churches will, number one, minimize or hide abuse scandals. So if allegations arise, leaders will make excuses for the abuser. They'll say things like, well, it was a mistake. There was temptation there, and who wouldn't fall into temptation if it was right in front of your eyes? They'll minimize the abuse and not call it what it is. They will typically refer to the alleged abuser as brother or sister rather than wolf or deceiver. And then they use sanitized language to describe the abuse. So they'll call it something like a misstep or inappropriate behavior. It's this vague description, if there's any description at all. And, they're certainly minimizing it. And at the end of the day, the church or the members of whatever organization don't have a clue what actually happened. They'll say things like, I don't know if you experienced this on the school board, but some things happened with this teacher. And, we're going to allow them to resign. And then that's the end of story. Well, okay, what were those some things that happened?
Well, it's interesting because on the school board level, we would discuss this privately in executive session, what did transpire. And some of the actions were horrific, involving, an adult teacher and a young child or a teenager. And we were reminded very often within that executive session that should we leak any of this information out, we are subject to severe punishment, including very steep fines and incarceration. So, in other words, keep your mouth shut. This is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it this way, because we don't want to upset, the entire public.
Right.
And we're just going to say goodbye to this person. They are aware what they're to do, hand in a nifty little resignation, and it's bye-bye.
Yeah. And they hide behind HIPAA too.
Exactly.
At schools, that's why they, they'll threaten criminal charges because they'll say if you speak up, this is a violation of HIPAA.
Oh, yeah.
The real criminal charges should be brought against the board members who hide abuse and who fail to name abuse, not the ones who are whistleblowers and who say, look, we want to know what this person did. You can't just give a generic resignation and say something happened. So, point number 2, unhealthy churches will not be transparent in communication. The messages to the church are extremely vague at best. If there's any communication to the church at all, it's going to be really vague, or it's going to be absent. The school board, I doubt they sent letters out to the parents of the students at the school saying that this teacher had sex with students. I doubt that they sent letters out warning parents saying, keep your child on close watch when they're around this teacher. Because this teacher has a past of sexual abuse or physical abuse or whatever it was.
Right.
Those letters are absent. The communication is absent. There's no transparency. Unhealthy churches will not communicate what actually happened, and they don't name names.
Never. No, never.
They'll refer to someone in the church had a misstep, or they fell into temptation, or whatever it is.
Well, they slipped up by human error after all, and then it comes in, haven't you done something similar in your
and
day?
if they don't say that, the implication is there.
It's
there. Haven't you
Absolutely.
Messed up? Haven't we all messed up?
If it's a younger person involved, they'll say, well, don't you remember when you were young having said or done something that was out of line with what you believe, and you turned out fine. Give this person a break. Something similar to that. We've heard it. We don't behind closed doors, and the public doesn't know what's going on. Sadly,
and it's very intentional. These kinds of vague messages, these really vague, incomplete messages, they leave church members guessing, and the goal is to hope that people will not inquire further about the allegations that came forward. So if there are any murmurings or any rumors or things like that, the leaders will capitalize on that and say, it's not good to gossip, and in fact, it's sinful. And much like what the school board did, we're going to bring charges against you. We're going to bring spiritual charges against you if you're guilty of gossiping.
Years and years and years ago, your dad's first preaching job, I know I've told you before, but he was fired after about a year and a half. I remember he was a youth pastor and at a rather large congregation. And one evening he came home after a men's meeting, as they were called, and he said, "You're not going to believe this. I was fired." I said, "What do you mean you were fired?" He said, I don't understand it. Now, I know he was lying. He knew why he was fired.
But you don't.
But
you still don't, do you?
To this day, I do not know why
Yeah.
he was fired. I do know it was abrupt. He was told, "Pack your bags and get moving. You are finished." That evening, he was to clear out all his things. He was done. They were not paying any compensation, so whatever he did was pretty bad. Now, what he told me was, they said, "I don't communicate well with the youth." Well, that's a bunch of baloney. I know that. You don't just out and out fire someone on the spot. If they're, this good person and that's their wrongdoing, they're not a good communicator, you work with that person.
Right. Yeah, you work it out.
You work it out.
Yeah.
But the congregation was just, to my knowledge, we weren't even there when the announcement was made. We just were told to pack your bags and get out. And it was, end of pay, end of everything. So I know, and I knew then something terrible had happened, but I didn't know what. And I was the wife in this case, kept totally in the dark. I can suspect, and I do suspect what happened, that there was misconduct of a pretty grave nature with a teen or multiple teens or youth.
Or younger.
Younger. Many of them were, 11 and 12 years old, certainly not of age for anything, but I was never told either. And that is so brutally wrong. It's just absolutely wrong.
It's dishonest. It's lying.
Yes.
It's dishonest.
It is.
We have bills in certain states, laws in certain states that are past the trash bills. And it's for school teachers. We don't have them, to my knowledge, that apply to religious communities, which I think is really unfortunate and foolish. But these don't pass the trash bills will put a mark on somebody who's been fired because of sexual misconduct. Even if charges haven't been pressed, if somebody is credibly accused of sexual misconduct, we have pass the trash bills or don't pass the trash bills, whatever they're called, where, it's interesting. They refer to the person as trash.
Quite interesting.
Because, because that kind of behavior can't be dumped on another institution, where that institution blindly hires these people, not knowing that there's any kind of a history. Because the reality is innocent people get harmed. So this kind of spills into number 3. Point number 3, unhealthy churches will reframe firings as resignations so that it appears that the guilty person is quitting and they have the blessing of the leaders. In fact, this phone call that I have right after we finish recording here, that's exactly what these leaders, and I spoke personally with the elders at this church, and they're still framing this as this guy's resigning. It was the preacher's decision to resign. And so it makes the guilty look bad to the church, but not for the reasons that they are guilty. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
So
it makes sense that it doesn't make sense. It's wrong.
I know. So
it's just wrong.
So it makes it look like, this preacher just up and left the church, or had a different calling somewhere else and decided that, they were going to move to another state to work with another church. And, in this case, actually, I don't remember if it's this case or another one, because there are 2 of these. there was another one that somebody had texted me about, another church where two of their ministers, a male and a female, were caught up in an affair with each other and, all this bizarre stuff. And they're framing this as a resignation. Mm-hmm. And one of these churches, I don't remember which one, the elders told the minister, we will not give you a letter of recommendation if you go to another church, which is unusual. Usually they say, if you remain silent, we will give you a letter of recommendation, mm-hmm. but only if you remain silent and don't mm-hmm. tell people why you're leaving. Which either way, it's wrong. It's lying. It's deceitful. It's horrific. It's unethical. Mm-hmm. It's immoral. So watch for churches that reframe firings as resignations, because from the church's perspective, a lot of you who are listening don't think when you hear somebody's resigning, you don't think, well, they're probably actually being fired. You just assume that a resignation is a resignation. Mm-hmm. Don't be so sure. So, again, typically leaders not only allow abusers to resign, quote unquote, but most often they'll give them letters of recommendation if they remain silent. They'll actually write letters of recommendation to the next church that these abusers go to. It's insanity. And church members should always question resignations, regardless of whether mm-hmm. you think it's a legitimate resignation or not. Find out. Ask the person who's resigning, are you really resigning or did you get fired? And if they say, I can't talk about it, they're being fired. Mm-hmm.
Right.
If they're saying, I've been sworn to secrecy by the leadership, go to the leadership and say, this person, their lips are sealed. They resigned. I find that incredibly interesting and troubling. Mm-hmm. Why did they resign? Well, we're not at liberty to talk about it. Yes, you are.
Mm-hmm. It's such a jumbled, bumbled up mess because in our society, we've grown to pretty much accept this, which is sad.
Yeah.
We don't question a lot of things like that because we feel like it's out of place. We're out of place.
Disrespectful to the leadership if we question them,
After
things like
all,
that.
That's why we have elders and our leaders within the church. That's why we have school boards. That's why we have administrative officials to take care of things like this. And we place innocently, quite often, our trust in these people.
Well, and it goes back to this, I think. I mean, don't trust people unless people are trustworthy.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't trust them just because you assume that they're in a position where they should be trusted and therefore they should be. Trust people only when they're trustworthy people.
And that's often hard to do when you're looking from the outside and you don't have a lot of interaction with the people in charge, so to speak. I think we're seeing a tangled web of mistrust and lies and contortions of all kinds within our government right now. And I don't want to get into that except by saying, who do you trust? That's the question we're left with. And I believe that within the confines of a church or schools or other administrations, that's how they get away with telling the lies. After all, do you want people doubting everything we do? Do you need people to know what really happened? We've taken care of the problem. Let's dismiss it and move on. That's the logic behind the lies, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. And
but it doesn't
solve
it does not resolve the problem.
No, it magnifies the problem.
It does.
Because now you're painting somebody who's credibly accused, you're painting them as a great spiritual person when they're not, which makes you a horrible spiritual person.
Right.
By lying about it and writing letters of recommendation and passing them on to the next church and making it somebody else's problem.
Right. And the problem that we're talking about, whether it be, a spiritual abuse or physical sexual abuse, those are all terrible, and they affect people and their faith forevermore. They truly do.
Yeah.
So,
point number 4, unhealthy churches will offer premature forgiveness that requires nothing of the offender. Watch for churches that do this, that are super quick to say, you know what, God's grace for all. When these other things are present, well, even when they're not present, but especially when these other things are present, be on high alert. If they're not transparent in communication, if they minimize the abuse, if they don't name the abuse or the abuser, and they're offering premature forgiveness, you have a Molotov concoction of a church that's about to implode on itself.
Right.
Watch for this premature forgiveness. Oh, we're all sinners, and so this brother did some things. We're not going to name those things, but did some things, and because of God's grace, and because you've received forgiveness, there's that. That's a very manipulative move, by the way, because you've received forgiveness. We're going to offer forgiveness to this brother too, and we're not going to question or bring any more embarrassment to him by asking hard questions. And so they frame it that way. They offer this premature forgiveness. That's incredibly unhealthy. Along with that, reconciliation is forced, and it's expected for the victims and the church members. So be ye reconciled to this brother who slipped up. And that's even if they fire / quote unquote resign the person, they still ask the church to surround this brother. And so what happens is the abuse victims in the church see these great going away parties for this pastor who resigned. Mm-hmm. And they've been on the receiving end of abuse.
Right.
And you can't blame the church members completely because they've been told a lie.
Right.
They believe that this is a good person. They believe this person is resigning and moving on to bigger and better things and bigger and better churches or whatever. And so, of course, they're going to throw a going away party.
Boy, I'm froggy here. Sorry about that. The damage that is done by just that simple thing, which isn't so simple, by giving that final, farewell with gifts and hugs and we wish you well and prayers, smothering the person in prayers and whatnot. To the people who have been abused, that is like stabbing them in the heart over and over and over again. It really is.
We'll go back and listen to our episode with Jules Woodson where she talks about that.
Absolutely.
And she's like, her abuser was given this great big going away party after she disclosed to the church leaders that he sexually assaulted her. Mm-hmm.
That's
and they still, the leaders allowed the going away party. Heck, they probably planned it.
I was going to say not only allowed, but probably participated in it. And it's just, opening that wound and digging deeper and deeper and deeper. The ripple effect goes on and on and on. The separation that it causes between the abused person and the church and their belief in God is often irreparable. And I think leaders don't understand the depth of pain that is caused by this.
Yeah. Well, when this premature forgiveness and this forced reconciliation, when those things are present, what the leaders are doing is they're pretending all is well, quote unquote, for the sake of the church. And they refuse to address the problem directly. And what happens, again, it's dishonest, it's lying, it's unethical, immoral, and it does nothing for the sake of the church except to damage it further. It creates this hostile environment where abusers are given free parade. They're allowed to walk all over the church, all over victims. They're allowed to reinvent themselves, move on to the next church with glowing recommendations, usually, from the very leaders who were in the know, and they kept the entire rest of the church in the dark. It creates this vicious cycle of abuse, and it doesn't hold the abusers accountable. It's awful.
It is. Jimmy, for our listeners, is there a distinction between the way a church should handle an abuser and the way the church should handle, let's say, I don't even know what word to use, average sinner? I don't know if that is even say you have a preacher, a pastor who is a closet alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
He is pretty much drunk and they don't know it every day of the week. He goes home and he just passes out, tells his wife he's exhausted, blah, blah, blah. They find out, okay, here he has this issue. He is getting drunk every day of the week. What do we do? Now, do you handle that the same way?
No, you don't.
That's what I wanted you to clarify.
Because the Bible doesn't handle
listening.
it the same
way.
Right.
Okay.
There is a distinction between people who do self-harm and then the ripple effects. There are always ripple effects. Innocent people still get harmed. When you're doing self-harm, somebody commits suicide. That's self-harm. But those ripple effects, of course, that affects other people horrifically. But self-harm is so much different. Substance abuse is so much different than intentionally targeting people, going after them and knowing what the end goal is. You know what you're going to do before you ever even do it, before you even think about victimizing and targeting certain victims. You know what the end result is. You know what you want. And the only way to get that is to pretend and to masquerade as if you are some Christian, godly, wonderful pillar of the community type person, and you pretend and you masquerade, and then you have every single scenario plotted and planned out as part of this deception, so that if you get caught, you already have 15 different outs that you can take.
Right.
And that it's this further deception, further manipulation. And so the Bible clearly distinguishes between those people and people like you and I who struggle with sin. For the former, for the deceiver, the person who the Bible identifies as a wolf, which is not what they do, it's who they are.
Right.
The Bible is crystal clear and very consistent. Have nothing to do with them. Avoid such people.
Right.
Stay away from them.
It's important to clarify when talking about this. Otherwise, some people might interpret it as, well, wow, he cheated on his income taxes once, and I know about it. And, that should be told, and that letter should be sent to every place following him. It's a lot different on that level than it is on the amount and depth of intentional harm that is done through abuse. And I think that's
But nonetheless,
important.
Regardless of what was done, whether it was tax evasion or whether it was abuse and deception, that still should be communicated. There's no reason to hide all this stuff.
I like what you said here about premature forgiveness, is wrong when it requires nothing of the offender. Until we are come to that point where we make a change, a turn in our lives, we haven't truly repented. Is that
right?
We really haven't. So, in that respect, once again, the church leaders are not helping this person or any future people that the abuser comes in contact with.
Right.
So it's a lose-lose on every level.
Yeah. Then our fifth and final point, unhealthy churches will refuse outside help and they fail to implement policy. They'll still say things like, well, we've got this handled. Our leadership had a meeting last night at 8:00. These guys have full-time jobs and they're so committed to the church that they even, gave up everything and went to this 1-hour meeting at 8:00 last night on a Thursday night. And we gathered together and the decision was unanimous. And we decided that, we know this is how we're going to handle it. If you hear things like that and there's no searching for outside help, or there's an outright refusal to receive outside help. If all of this is internal, these closed door meetings within the church, it's an unhealthy church. It's an incredibly unhealthy, toxic church. If they fail to implement policy even after these allegations come forward, it's an unhealthy church. And, I guess I'll end with this because this happened literally right before Mom showed up here to start recording today. I heard the fire whistle go off. And just out of habit, I turned the scanner on, and my kids love to listen in to the scanner, and, they analyze and they kind of commentate when the scanner's going off. So I listened to the scanner, and it was a really bad car accident about a mile from here. There was a car that had a head-on collision with a coal truck, triaxle. And so, I'm listening, and I know exactly where it is. It's a bad spot. It's down in a valley. Mom, it's just past the elementary schools.
Oh, I know, right.
So down, down in that curve, it's really foggy down there. Right. There's a little creek, and cold mornings like this morning, it was 32 degrees, incredibly foggy. That fog just settles down in the valley. Probably was a visual issue. That's a bad curve to begin with. So anyway, I'm listening to the firefighters, and the EMS show up, and there was an entrapment. The guy in the car was entrapped. Well, they called in life flight helicopter. And so MedStar said, we're 1 minute out. They have a helipad about a mile straight away from my house. So they're about a minute out. They set up the laser guide for the helicopter, and they're talking to the pilot. And the pilot comes in, and I actually watched the helicopter. It went right past my window, this window right here that you're looking at. So I watched the helicopter go by, and I'm listening to the pilot, and the pilot gets on, and he says, because of the fog and the visibility, it's unsafe to land. He said, we're going back and requesting that you take the patient back to the pad. And so that, there was just this incredible communication from setting up, the traffic guides to putting out the flares, to the extraction crew, to the EMS, to the helicopter. There was no secrecy because you can't afford secrecy. You can't afford to not be transparent, regardless of whose fault it was. That's interesting because in the moment, that's not a question. They figure that out later. Right. In the moment, they say, okay, there's a critical situation. We need to communicate with everybody and communicate well. And there are protocols and checklists that they go through in order to communicate, to get the best care as quickly as possible and to remedy the situation. And so to be able to watch, and I watched the helicopter circle around as I'm listening to the pilot talking, saying it's unsafe to land. And he circled back, went back to the pad. And, and then eventually, and actually really quickly, they extracted the passenger. Then they decided that it was unsafe to land up in Johnstown at Conemaugh Hospital because of the fog. And so the pilot got back on, and he said, we're refusing to take the patient to Conemaugh. Please advise, take them by ambulance. And then the ambulance driver gets back on and said, received. And then off they take the patient. So it's just this, to see that contrast between that accident scene and how quickly they extracted somebody and took care of it and had the road cleaned up and had the road back opened up within 20 minutes. That all transpired. Right. I mean, this isn't rocket science.
Think of if they hadn't done that, how many additional accidents could have potentially happened. That person could have bled to death. Had they not gotten proper attention there could have been a double accident. The helicopter could have landed and if you had a stubborn
pilot or lack of communication between him and the ground crew.
When you compare that to how churches and other institutions are handling the critical care that's needed during abuse situations, we really fail. We are really failing.
Yeah. If I were to grade,
we are failing.
The church that I have a phone call about after we end this session, if I were to give them a grade, I would give them an F- for how they handled this.
Absolutely.
Now, did they confront the minister and eventually fire him? Yeah, but I still give them an F- because their painting is a resignation. They're allowing him to apply at other churches. They've minimized the abuse. All of these signs that we just went over, all 5 of them, they failed miserably. Failed. They get an F- for how they handled it. And this is average. This phone call is not atypical.
I know that.
It's average. It's common.
I know that.
So imagine if that's how we were training our EMS and firefighters and helicopter pilots, and if we were training them the way that we train our churches, or lack thereof of the training, can you imagine if these guys were a bunch of bumbling idiots who were lying and deceiving and not communicating out here at the accident scenes? Can you imagine?
There would be multiple deaths piled up. Yes.
We'd be yelling at the EMS and fire crews to not show up if we got into an accident. We'd be like, stay away from me. And that's exactly what's going on in the church. Victims are saying, stay away from us. You guys are only causing more harm. You're reckless. You're lying. You're deceiving. You don't communicate well. So we can't afford to get this wrong. That's the point. Period. We cannot afford to keep getting this so wrong. So we're going to leave you with this truth bomb today. You as church leaders, you as church members, learn to recognize signs of unhealthy churches and organizations, and don't be afraid to hold leaders accountable for bad behavior and dishonesty. Hold them accountable. Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.